Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. We read together from Numbers chapter 20. And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before Yahweh. Why have you brought the assembly of Yahweh into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of Yahweh appeared to them. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff, and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock from them for them, and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff from before Yahweh as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with Yahweh, and through them he showed himself holy." Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. "Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that we have met, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we lived in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our fathers. And when we cried to Yahweh, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. And here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your territory. Please, let us pass through your land. We will not pass through field or vineyard or drink water from a well. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory." But Edom said to him, "You shall not pass through, lest I come out with the sword against you." And the people of Israel said to him, "We will go up by the highway, and if we drink of your water, I and my livestock, then I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more." But he said, "You shall not pass through." And Edom came out against them with a large army and with a strong force. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. And they journeyed from Kadesh, and the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came to Mount Hor. And Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, "Let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the people of Israel, because you have rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and shall die there." Moses did as Yahweh commanded, and they went up Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there, on top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, and when all the congregation saw that Aaron had perished, all the house of Israel wept for Aaron 30 days. This is the word of the Lord. Our text today begins, well, actually, it has both the beginning and the end, the death of Moses' siblings. We start with Miriam dying in verse 1, and then we end with Aaron dying in verses 28 and 29. We're not sure the time period here, as we're told it's in the first month that this happens, this chapter happens, but we're not told which year. So it's a new year, whatever year it is, and they've moved their camp, and they are now in the wilderness of Zin, which, if you're looking at a map, if you're looking at the Sinai Peninsula, that triangular shaped thing above the Red Sea, this is closer to the Mediterranean Sea. It's still in the Sinai Peninsula, but they've moved northward some. Really, they're right along the southern border of the Promised Land at this point. Kadesh is a city in the southern part of this wilderness of Zin. The people, again, grumble against Moses and Aaron and therefore against God himself, wishing. I mean, look at this. They wish they were dead. Would that we had died too. The whole congregation of them, a couple million people, at least. This is harsh because they're thirsty. And you can see it in their words that they doubt God's promise. Again, in verse 5, there it is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates. There's no water to drink. They doubt that the Lord will provide for them and care for them. This is rough. Moses and Aaron leave the assembly and go to the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. They come before God and they bow themselves to the ground. They throw themselves at the Lord's mercy, and Yahweh speaks to them. He tells them to take the staff. Now, that's an interesting reference. It's not take your staff, it's take the staff. And as you see again in verse 9, Moses takes the staff from before Yahweh. And what staff was before Yahweh? I mean, this really sounds like Aaron's staff, the one that has sprouted and budded and blossomed and almonded. And he takes it. That's the one to use. That's the way the text reads. Although if you pair it back to Exodus chapter 17, which is the parallel account of this event, it says Moses takes the staff which he used to strike the Nile. Now, it's possible that that is one and the same staff, as Aaron is the one that often did the miracles and brought about the plagues anyway, because, again, Moses was too afraid. So, certainly possible they're one and the same staff. That's the way we should be looking at that. God specifically commands him to take this staff and to speak to the rock. Tell the rock before their eyes to give water. When you read the account of what Moses actually does, ask your children if Moses followed God's directions or not. And he didn't. Moses does not speak to the rock. Instead, first he challenges the people. And hear now, you rebels. And essentially, I mean, what do you expect us to do about your thirst? Is the question. But then he turns around and he takes his staff, he strikes the rock twice. That's not what God said to do. God said, speak. Moses doesn't speak, he strikes. There's a big difference between those two actions. A big difference in the way God works. As we think of God speaking things into existence, here God was going to speak water into existence for this people. He was going to use it to care for them. But even Moses doesn't trust in that right now, and he's going to pay for this one. That's verse 12. Now, the punishment for Moses and Aaron not believing Yahweh here and not doing what he gave them to do, they don't get to go into the promised land. Moses, the guy who's been leading them all this time, Aaron, their high priest, neither of them get to enter the Holy Land. And so we're down to just Joshua and Caleb of the four. That of all the Israelites 20 and above that would get to enter the promised land when this all started. Now, there's a really interesting New Testament connection here. As you read from 1 Corinthians 10, which is Paul warning the people in Corinth against being idolaters, he points us back to this. So I'm going to read the first 5 verses there. I want you to know, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, that's God's appearance, and all passed through the sea, the Red Sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, manna and quail, and all drank the same spiritual drink, water at Meribah. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Moses striking this rock here, New Testament Paul calls the rock Jesus. That Jesus was with them, present with them in the form of a rock to care for them and to provide for them, to give them drink, not just in that moment, but that rock then followed them around, which is quite a unique picture. But Christ is present with his people, pre-incarnate, before he took on flesh to look like one of us so that he could die on the cross. He's already involved. We know from John 1 he's involved in creating. We know from this that he's already out there caring for his creation. So we move on. The next paragraph then, Meribah means quarreling in Hebrew. I wanted to include that note. Edom is brought up in verse 14. Edom is the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. So you had the twins, Jacob and Esau. Jacob's descendants are now asking for permission to pass through the land of Esau's descendants. That's the request here. So Esau's family settles down east of where Kadesh is. If you look at a map, you've got the Salt Sea, Dead Sea, just south of the Jordan River. Edom is south and southeast of the Salt or Dead Sea, depending on your time period. And so they're making the request that they can pass through from Kadesh, that they can go through Edom, and they can start heading up there. I mean, they're going for the promised land. God is going to bring them to the promised land from the east. They're going to cross the Jordan River to get there. And the quickest way is to go up through Edom and then through Moab. And that would get them to where they need to go. And the King's Highway that you see in verse 17 does exactly that. The King's Highway is a nice road that caravans and military troops would take. It runs really from that point turns northward, and it runs all the way up through Edom and Moab until you get really further north, all the way up to Damascus, the capital of Syria. So big road, and they promise here that they're not going to venture off of the road. They're not going to take any food. They're not going to take any drink. They're just going to go along the road and leave everything alone. They just want passage. Now you can talk about their story before we get to Edom's response. Verse 14 through 16, as they tell their history here, they end it by telling the gospel. They tell about their troubles that they ran into and then how God saved them. And this is a great spot to kind of settle in with your children and have a conversation about how would you tell your story about the troubles you've faced, the trouble of our sin, and of how God saved you. You see the picture there, the connection? It's a great chance to have a family conversation about evangelism, how we share our faith with others. And then, as we keep going here, verse 18, Edom's response, you shall not pass through. And then it comes with a threat. If you do, turn the sword against you. They make a second request, a softer, a humbler request, even offering payment. And again, second denial. And in addition to that, they form a blockade. Edom's army comes out against Israel. They won't let them pass. I mean, that's a lot of intensity there. So they don't go through Edom. They keep traveling south of Edom. So they're heading east, but south of Edom, and they're going to go around it. And they get to Mount Hor, again, south of Edom. And there, we learn Aaron dies. Because of, again, the rebellion at Meribah. He does not get to enter into the promised land. And so they take Eleazar, one of his two remaining sons, up the mountain. And they do it in the sight of all the people so that they know that there's no doubt that God has chosen this. And they take the high priestly garments off of Aaron, and they put them on his son. We have a new high priest over Israel, the second high priest. Aaron is no longer. And in fact, right there, he dies. The death of Moses is going to sound quite similar. There's nothing here that indicates Aaron dies of his own volition. He just climbed up a mountain. The Lord puts an end to his life. God's judgment for Aaron's sin happens right there, as it will again of Moses in Deuteronomy 34. And there's another parallel there. The mourning of the people, as they mourn and they grieve over the death, they do so for 30 days for both Aaron and Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 34. I don't have the specific verse for you, but that's where you'd see it. And I mean, with Aaron, it's again, he's their high priest, and with Moses, he's been their leader all that time. So their period of grief normally was a week, but for these prominent men in their community, it was longer. It was a whole month. Aaron dies. And so in this chapter, we've lost the siblings, the two siblings of Moses that we're aware of in Scripture. Miriam dies, and then Aaron dies. And well, the journey to the promised land continues.